Hello and welcome to another session of the My Solo 401k Financial, My Community daily webinar series. Thank you so much for joining. We're excited to discuss today how nurse practitioners can secure retirement with a solo 401k. Today, we're diving into one of the most powerful yet overlooked retirement tools out there, the solo 401k. Why does it matter? Because if you're 1099, you're the boss. And that means you can unlock more tax savings and retirement potential than most people realize. Here's what we'll cover: why most self-employed folks fall behind on retirement and how to avoid it. Solo 401k versus SEP IRA. Which one gives you the upper hand? How to contribute up to $70,000 or more if you're 50 or older to your future. We'll go through a real world example for nurse practitioners and how going 1099 can supercharge your financial freedom. As always, the presentation is being provided for educational purposes only and should not be construed as tax, legal, or investment advice, nor as a solicitation. When making an investment decision, please consult with your tax attorney and financial professional. Why many fall behind on retirement savings? Well, there could be multiple reasons, but very common reasons are going to be things such as student debt or family expenses, lifestyle inflation, lack of structured retirement plan, market volatility and procrastination, and just no employer-sponsored retirement options. So in other words, no access to a retirement plan. What happens when you realize you're behind is your debt still lingers, retirement savings are not on track. You realize that you need to catch up fast. So enter the 1099 life and solo 401k strategy. The solo 401k plan is a very powerful retirement tool. As a matter of fact, it has the highest contribution limits for any defined contribution plan available to self-employed individuals. It's specifically designed for solopreneurs with no full-time W-2 employees other than a spouse, if any. So the key is that there are no non-owner, non-spouse, full-time W-2 employees working for any business owned by you or a spouse, if any, and also that such individual reports earned self-employment income on their taxes. So that could be W-2 wages, for example, for a business taxed as an S Corp, income reported on Schedule C for a business taxed as a sole proprietorship, or income reported on line 14 of a K-1 in the event of a self-employed business taxed as a partnership. Our solo 401k plan has the maximum amount of features and capabilities. For example, it allows for both employee and employer contributions. This is how you're able to contribute the most to a solo 401k. In other words, it has the highest contribution limits for any defined contribution plan available to self-employed individuals. Moreover, our solo 401k plan is not only going to allow for pre-tax contributions, which when you make a pre-tax contribution, it reduces your taxable income for the year for which you make the contribution, but it also allows for both Roth and after-tax contributions. When you make after-tax contributions, that's how one makes mega backdoor Roth contributions. For example, with the mega backdoor Roth solo 401k, someone can contribute up to $70,000 or more if they're age 50 or older, where those funds will end up in a Roth account, where you've got that potential for tax-free growth. When you compare it to other self-employed retirement plan options, like a SEP IRA, a solo 401k has much more higher savings potential. Therefore, it's a very, again, powerful retirement tool, which is going to be available to a nurse practitioner who is self-employed with no full-time W-2 employees working for such person other than a spouse, if any. So if you compare the solo 401k versus a SEP IRA, it's clear why the solo 401k wins. It's focusing, for example, just on contributions, right? With a SEP IRA, you can only make employer contributions. For example, that's 20% of your net earnings when the business is taxed as a sole proprietorship. Whereas with the solo 401k, you're going to not only be able to make employer contributions, but you could also make employee contributions and even after tax. In other words, mega backdoor Roth contributions. So with the solo 401k, in addition, with our plan, it's going to allow for Roth contributions, Roth employee, Roth employer, as well as mega backdoor Roth. Yes, thanks to Secure Act 2.0, it is now possible to make a Roth contribution to a SEP IRA, assuming the SEP IRA provider allows you to do so, but you're still limited to that employer contribution. Having access to an employee contribution means you're also able to make catch-up contributions, right? Catch-up contributions, those come in once someone is age 50 or older, right? With the idea being that you might be behind on your retirement savings. So now you can catch up by being able to contribute more. For example, for 2025, if you're age 50 or older and you have a solo 401k plan that allows for catch-up contributions like ours does, you can make a $7,500 catch-up contribution, assuming you've got the self-employment income to justify it. Or if you're age 60 to 63, now for 2025, if you have a plan like ours that allows it, you can make a super catch-up contribution, which instead of being $7,500, that catch-up amount is raised if you're age 60 to 63 to $11,250. So in short, if you're age 60 to 63 for 2025, you might be able to, if you have the self-employment income to justify it, you'll be able to save up to $81,250 just in 1 year, just for 2025 to the solo 401k. And then again, with the ability to also make after tax, or which is how one makes mega backdoor Roth contributions. And that's just the comparison in terms of contributions. A solo 401k also has additional benefits, such as the ability to take a 401k participant loan. You can't take a loan from any type of IRA, including a SEP IRA, as well as the ability to easily invest with checkbook control in alternative investments like crypto and real estate, plus the fact that a solo 401k, at least our solo 401k plan, is eligible for $1,500 in solo 401k tax credits. Those are under the Secure Act. If you have a plan that includes the automatic contribution feature, like our solo 401k plan does, it'll make the self-employed person or business eligible to claim $1,500 in solo 401k tax credits. So that's just another reason that the solo 401k often wins versus the SEP IRA, because those tax credits are not available to someone when they just set up a SEP IRA. So let's go through a practical example for a nurse practitioner. Let's assume that the individual has $200,000 of self-employed income, right? In our experience, a lot of medical professionals do set up solo 401k plans, and a lot of them will oftentimes have a fair amount of self-employment income. So this could be a realistic example. So if that individual is not making contributions to another plan, like a day job plan, they're going to be able to maximize the employee contribution to the solo 401k. Remember, a SEP IRA doesn't allow for employee contributions, but a solo 401k plan does. For 2025, you can contribute 100% of your self-employment compensation, dollar for dollar, up to $23,500 as an employee contribution, plus additional contributions if you're 50 or older. That's the first bucket. The second bucket that the person could start to fill up is the employer bucket. Now that's going to be a percentage of the self-employment compensation. It's 20% of self-employment compensation where the business is taxed as a sole proprietorship or a partnership, where you first have to run a pre-calculation to determine self-employment compensation. For example, in the case of a business taxed as a sole proprietorship, where that self-employment income is reported on Schedule C of the 1040, that pre-calculation is line 31 of Schedule C. So in other words, your net income after business expenses, less 1/2 of the self-employment tax. And we help our customers run those numbers every day. We have an online calculator on our website that will also run the numbers. So of that amount, the individual could contribute 20% as an employer contribution. Whereas if the business is taxed as an S Corp, self-employment compensation is going to be equal to the W-2 wages that the person receives from their self-employed business taxed as an S Corp or a C Corp. So let's assume that this individual has $200,000 of W-2 wages from their self-employed business. In that case, they can contribute 1/4 of $200,000. So that's going to be $50,000 as an employer contribution, and then they could contribute the difference as a employee contribution up to $70,000. So the total amount of contributions between employee and employer cannot exceed the overall limit, which is $70,000 for 2025. So that you can see that it has much higher contribution potential, because you're not just limited to that employer contribution. And as the income goes down, right, the difference is going to be even greater, right? Let's assume that the individual had $40,000 of W-2 wages. Well, with a SEP IRA, they're only going to be able to contribute 1/4 or $10,000 as a SEP IRA contribution. But if they have a solo 401k, they'll not only be able to fill up that employer bucket, but they'll also be able to make an employee contribution of $23,500, bringing their total amount of contributions based on the $40,000 of W-2 wages to $33,500. That's assuming they don't make contributions to another plan like a day job plan. So that's just another example of the power of the solo 401k just on contribution capacity or ability alone. There are, of course, other strategic benefits of becoming a contractor. For example, the individual will have more control over their income and deductions. We've been discussing how they'll have now access to a solo 401k, assuming that they don't have any employees working for any business owned by such person or a spouse, if any. They can customize their tax strategy. For example, you could do a mixture of pre-tax and Roth contributions, right? If you're looking for tax diversification. Retirement acceleration with larger limits. In other words, you're just able to contribute so much more to the solo 401k versus an IRA or a SEP IRA or an employer plan. All right, so thank you so much for checking out today's webinar. If you found it to be helpful, if you could please like the video on whatever platform you're watching, whether on Instagram or LinkedIn or YouTube, X. We really appreciate that, as it helps us get the word out to other self-employed individuals, solopreneurs, freelancers, just like you. Also, we want to invite you to our community, mysolo401k.net/my community. We have over 30,000 members, vibrant forums. We've got a library of videos and webinars on there in the community. So it's totally free to join. All are welcome. It's not just limited to clients, really just anybody in the community is welcome. We also have the industry's first AI, solo401k.ai is where you can access it. You can use it for free. It's a great way to find answers to questions quickly or other resources. So please don't hesitate. All right, with that, that takes us to the end of today's session. Again, we appreciate the chance to discuss these topics. Please subscribe so you get notifications. We'll be back tomorrow with more content. Feel free to bring questions, as we're happy to discuss either questions on topic or off topic. But yes, until next time, take care, everyone.